Good morning and welcome to the Propeller Club of Northern California. I'm Stas Margaret. As I was about to say, we have a very interesting export review from Paul Snell today. He will be introduced by Ron Brown from the Port of Oakland. And we are very interested to hear what the analysis is because we lost a number of services and we need a strategy. Ron and Paul will be talking about that. Ron has some information. We, as always, the shipping business is never boring. So with that, I am going to start introducing our guests, and I will start with my close comrade in arms, Mr. Todd Crawshaw. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning. I'm Todd Crawshaw. Business is Crawshaw Design. We provide integrated brand marketing for print and web and premier web hosting, IT support.
Thank you, Todd. Mr. Bill Nixon. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning. Bill Nixon, Transmarine Navigation, tramp, ship, bulk, ship agent, and member of the San Francisco Board Marine Exchange, something like that.
Thank you, Bill. Bryce Leon. Bryce, good morning. Would you introduce yourself?
Good morning. Bryce Leon with PCC Logistics Business Development Team.
Thank you very much. Captain Ann McIntyre. Captain, good morning.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Ann McIntyre, the business director for San Francisco Bar Pilots. I'll pass it off to my colleague, Captain John Carlier.
Well, okay. Captain John, are you there?
Good morning, John Carlier, board agent, San Francisco Bar Pilots.
Okay. Captain Ann, before you go away, you had some excitement last week. Can you give us a very brief sketch of how you managed to save our 3 ships from getting caught in a fire?
Well, we were dispatched real quickly to the fire, and when we had 3 pilots, Captain Dave McCloy, Captain Jesse Pullen, and Captain Ray Rydens. We called through, who was around and available to get down there right away, and the flames were coming down the dock when they got there, and all 3 pilots boarded the ships. They worked with the tugboats to make sure they could, get the ships off the dock as quickly as possible, and then redirected the tugboats to get in there and start fighting the fire into the dock. So, I mean, it could have been really bad. But fortunately, we were able to get there in time and get them off the dock. And the other good news is that, particularly we were concerned about whether or not they would be able to work the car carriers, but the Coast Guard has had a look at everything, and the port is open and functioning, which is super important to us, considering all the other challenges that we're facing. It was about the last thing we wanted to have happen.
Right, and that was at the Port of Benicia. For anybody who does not know, there was a fire that broke out there the Sunday before last. The bar pilots were able to get out there in record time and get 3 vessels that were very close to the flames off the docks, and as Captain McIntyre explained, to safety so that the firefighters could get into the docks. And congratulations, Ann and bar pilots. That was a really first-class job, and a real demonstration of your essential service to this port complex. Thank you very much. Okay, Daniel Serrato.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm a client account executive for PCC Logistics through the Port of Oakland and a member of the Pacific Transportation Association.
Daniel, welcome. Derek Pritchard.
How you doing? Derek Pritchard with OL USA and TTS Worldwide, freight forwarder, and interested in ag business.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Hey, Paul.
I have an iPhone person. Can that person introduce themselves? Is that gone? Okay. Kevin Policarpo. Good morning, Kevin.
Morning, Mr. Sass.
Good
I'm
morning.
sorry about the noise in the background. My my house's heater's on.
Okay, you have a good one. We'll see you in a few minutes. Evie,
Got it.
good morning. Evie, can you hear me?
Good morning. Sorry, joining late. How's everyone? Evie Wong with Alba Wheels Up, president of the Customs Brokers Forwarder Association of Northern California. Pleased to be here and to hear from Paul Snell again.
Thank you very much, Evie. And a board member of the Propeller Club of Northern California.
Present.
Laura Covery. Good morning, Laura.
Morning, Stas. Good morning, everyone. Laura Covery. I am former mariner working at Cal State Long Beach and at UCLA Extension, and sometimes at an apprenticeship program in Southern California.
Very good. Laura, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Nicholas Zyman. Nicholas, good morning.
Good morning. I'm a student at Cal State Long Beach under Professor Kovari, senior supply chain management student.
And you've written a very interesting report on marine highway shipping, of which I hope to see more of.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Nicholas. Paul, you want to introduce yourself? Okay, Paul he will be back in a second, I'm sure. Ron Brown.
Good morning, everyone. Ron Brown with the Port of Oakland. Avid ag export enthusiast, trying to help move our ag exports to various parts of the world.
Very good. Well, you'll be back in just a second, Ron. Tony Petronio. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Stas. Good morning, everybody. Tony Petronio, General Manager at the operations here at Storm Geo, and we provide weather routing services.
Well, thank you very much. And as always, Tony, I want to thank you for your support of the Propeller Club and all of the good work that you guys do.
Thank you, Stas.
Okay, guys, it is time to go to our main event, and I am going to hand off to Ron Brown, a marketing manager at the Port of Oakland. Ron is one of the point people for agricultural exports in Northern California and for agricultural exporters around the United States. He is a member of the Propeller Club of Northern California board. He has been around the block, so to speak, on this issue for many years. And Ron, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Stas, and good morning again, everyone. And I'm so excited to introduce my friend Paul Snell. Paul actually presented to us about a year ago, and he's back by popular demand, mostly because he knows what he's talking about. You know, Paul is the Chief Executive Officer of British American Shipping. British American is an ocean transport intermediary and NVOCC that operates as a global specialist in the movement of world trade commodities by ocean transportation. Paul has been in the industry for a number of years, working for others, Ocean Express being one, CP Ships, and he's also a very active member of the AgTC, the Agriculture Transportation Coalition. So with that, let me turn it over to Paul.
Thanks very much, Ron, for that introduction. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with everybody today. My passion is with US exports, and I'm obviously very fortunate to be able to represent in the US exporters today with this presentation. And I want to go over a large section of criteria. There's an awful lot going on at the moment at the port, and I have genuine concerns for its future at the moment. And I want to address all those issues with you, go through them. And hopefully at the end of the presentation, we'll have some good questions and some good discussion points that we can also add. But I really feel the time for talking is over and the time for action is needed with regards to the Port of Oakland. So let's start with the presentation. So this slide basically will just go over.
We're not seeing this. We're not
Is
seeing
everyone
this.
seeing it?
No. Not to hit the share screen again.
Oh, okay. Do you need anything from my end?
Well, if you just hit what you did before, the share screen, and it should click on your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
If it doesn't look like it's working, Paul, why don't you just start going through it? Let's give it another 30 seconds, and then why don't you go through it? We have the slides, and so we can distribute the slides later.
Yeah, I'll try and get that over to everyone in a minute, but let's start the presentation. So first of all, I'm going to just backtrack on the past. A lot of this first slide you will be aware of, and it's just recapping. People can't see the shared screen.
Oh, okay.
There.
Right, we good?
Yes, got it.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not technology savvy, so I struggle with things like that a little bit. So basically, the global supply chain has changed. Well, we believe it's changed with regards to focus on Asia exports, but that's not really been anything different in the last 10 or 15 years. US export freight prices have been low for some time, and a lot of carriers did see that the US export was the return leg, and the profits were all coming from the import cargoes. The change obviously is that the carriers have stopped calling certain ports, Oakland being one of them, which is now impacting our ability to move exports. But overall, we've been in for about 15, 20 years with imports from Asia dominating global trade. We are now seeing port emissions and blank sailings, and this has really come from no fault of Oakland, okay? This is because of the congestion that has been seen in Los Angeles and Long Beach with regards to connecting a lot of the Midwest and New York import cargo on the rail. Though the terminal has become impacted, the berthing delays went up to 50 days at one point. And because of schedule rectification purposes and the need to keep vessels rotating across the globe, carriers have started to cut ports that they deem not as so essential to import deliveries. And this has obviously impacted Oakland greatly, okay? Carriers want quicker container turnaround times so that they can return boxes back to Asia and earn good freight rates from Asia into the USA and Asia to Europe. The freight rates from Asia to the USA are around the $20,000 mark per container. And obviously the US export rates in the other direction. We're gonna talk about the fact they have gone up, but to start off with, US exports were about 30% of the round trip price. And that's with the increase of rates from Asia to the USA, we're now down to about 10% of the round trip price. So carriers can definitely earn more money by taking imports, and they've been positioning, been taking those valuable empty containers from US ports, turning them around, reloading them back to China in order to get those higher freight rates. Demurrage and detention, really important for the carriers that they try to reduce this globally. There's a container shortage. If people are using the boxes for storage, they're unable to ship them. They're unable to get the freight rates, so they're trying to reduce it. We've seen problems with equipment and chassis shortages. Obviously, equipment being moved out empty, and the chassis shortage problem has been largely of struggling to control the chassis that are moving between ports. For example, Oakland chassis are ending up into Los Angeles. Los Angeles chassis are going elsewhere, and we're losing control of those chassis. But I think Ron Brown will tell me that Oakland chassis position is quite well balanced and quite well managed, okay? Trucking shortages is not new. It's very, very old problem. Average age of a US truck driver is 56. Environmentalists have pushed very different engine strategies through, meaning that the truckers have had to change their rigs a lot in order to keep on track with environmental issues. This all costs money. A lot of the truckers weren't earning good monies previously because the trucking profits were very, very low until the pandemic hit. And we'll talk about the changes with trucking pricing later on in this presentation. But there wasn't the money in trucking, and we were grateful for the truckers that had stayed in during those difficult times. But we do have a trucking shortage in the USA. This is very common in other countries too. Increased fuel costs recently. Rising fuel costs has been a continuous problem over the last 5 to 10 years. But at current, the rise in fuel costs is not helping the rise in shipping costs, so it's impacting it even more greatly. And of course, this is impacting truckers' pricing. It's impacting carriers' pricing, and doesn't help the US exporter at this time. And terminals becoming increasingly difficult to work with due to rolls and short receiving windows. It's important that I relay that this is not all the terminal's fault. This is obviously berthing delays of the vessels. US exporters are waiting long periods of time for the vessels to show up. And when they do show up, the carriers have to decide how many men they're going to employ to work the vessels, how long those shifts are going to be. They obviously want the ships to leave the port as soon as possible to get back on the schedules. And some of them are taking berthing windows that are short in order to get their vessel in quickly. All this is impacting, of course, the US exporter who's desperately trying to load his box. And we have a moving timeline of when they can deliver the box. We have advanced cutoffs. We've got the terminal having to shorten the windows. And it just becomes very, very difficult to land export containers with these shortened windows. Just a review here of how we got to this position. This is all very important information. Export rate balance, which I touched upon on the last slide. Obviously, the rates were so vastly different between imports and exports that we have imbalanced profitability. Obviously, carriers then favoring the import shipments. Free time across the globe. From a US exporter's perspective, this is not something that they really create as a problem. A lot of this is due to world traded commodities, the price of commodities, that the buyers want the ability to store products when they arrive in the foreign country in order that they can sell the goods at the right time. And also, of course, customs procedures are very difficult in certain countries, and therefore additional free time is required. But generally, I think the world has gone a little crazy on free time, and there was definitely ways and means that we could shorten the free time, but still enable boxes to move in and out of ports correctly. So overall, I think free time does need to be addressed. It would be wonderful if we had one global free time agreement across the board with all the carriers. This way, it wouldn't be used as a bargaining chip, and we wouldn't waste as much time as we do on this subject, because so many deals are made or broken by the free time element. And really, we've all got to do our bit to help push containers through the system. The pandemic obviously impacted the slowing down of vessels, the slowing down of moving freight, but it also had a huge impact on the change of e-commerce, which increased 39% overnight, with everyone sitting at home, not able to travel, not able to go to pubs, not able to go on holiday, and had some disposable income, which they decided they would go online and order goods for their household. And obviously it increased the amount of inventory that had to move from foreign lands into the USA. Okay, so this rapidly increased global shipping. and obviously it's had a huge impact. Before the pandemic, everyone was happy to go to the shops and use the inventory that was brought into the shops over time, but that all changed when the pandemic hit. And that is still maintained today. We have 6 ports on the US West Coast. I want to say, I think some are grossly underutilized, and there's reasons for this, of course. On-dock rail is a huge issue. The location of where imports need to be delivered is a huge issue, but generally we need to be looking at our rail links, I think, internally, to see if there are better ways in which we can move freight from the US West Coast into the United States, because it seems crazy to me that we continue to go through one port which is blocked and having tremendous delays for everybody. Insufficient terminals. Oakland's ranked 332 out of 351 for efficiency. We're going to talk more about that later on, and I'll be able to show a little bit more on the importance of that. I do think that obviously we're all fully aware that there's the negotiation going on with the union and the carriers right now. I certainly don't want to put my head into that political hornet's nest. But what I do want to say is that is not all about money. There is infrastructure and technology being looked at as well. I think it's a very important negotiation, and I hope everybody comes out of it with what they're looking for. The only thing that concerns me is, though, that the exporters and importers of the USA are completely unaware of what is being asked and are not consulted really on how they want the ports of the future to be. And it would be a really good idea to get together with everybody to discuss how we could make the ports more efficient and what the importers and exporters really want from the terminals. Because if there are higher terminal handling fees to be paid, I think the importers and exporters would be interested to pay them if they felt it was going to really improve the efficiency of the ports. Over-reliance on imports and no support for export markers from the carriers in order to maximize profits. That is why we're here today. That's what we're going to talk about in more detail. I will add that MSC is going against the market at the moment and have positioned in equipment into Oakland and are opening up all services from Oakland at this time. We're very, very grateful for MSC for doing this. I think it's a really, really good step forward in the recovery of the port. And I think that this will obviously yield MSC some really good market share. They will become a very good slot charter partner for others in the months to come. And I also think that in 1 year or just over 1 year, US exports will become important to everybody again. Slot charterers around the world, these alliances that we now work with that share ships together. Let's not forget that that was really brought upon by low profits, sharing synergies. But unfortunately for us now, we are facing 3 major alliances that have gone from a primary service industry to a global money-making machine. I think this was always the plan, and I think it was well known that it could go in this direction. And obviously we hope that it wouldn't, but it has. And the problem that we face is that there are a very, very small number of decision makers making the decisions on where the ships are going, making the decisions on how long they sit in a port, and the rest of the market are completely unable to control what's going on in order to service their cargo and their customers. Manufacturing has changed a lot over the years too. We saw outsourcing from the USA into China, and it's been changing ever since. China's now outsourcing to Cambodia. Bangladesh are becoming important. We're seeing a rise of cargoes into India and Pakistan, and obviously getting these global ships into these ports is difficult with drafts, difficult because some of these places are war zones. Trade is changing, manufacturing's changing. It doesn't always make it easy for the global shipping pattern. Despite rising costs of shipping, I also want to point out service and efficiency has declined. And this is very frustrating, particularly to US exporters. Very, very hard to work with daily. Having the carriers' customer service departments work on trying to work with us in loading US export has become increasingly difficult. The carriers are asking for more efficiencies from the trade. We now have to make sure that our documentation is being submitted with real details. The dummy instructions is going away. The windows of delivery are smaller. It's harder to get boxes. And the US exporters are having to work so much harder and be more efficient in order to load freight. And I don't feel that the autonomy and I don't feel that the service we're getting back in return is equal to what we're being asked to deliver. And there is a small slide here of the Port of Oakland at the side, which gives you an analysis of empties and fulls being loaded at the port at this time. And you can see that despite carriers pulling services away from Oakland, the US exports are still climbing. And the other concern, of course, is empty exports are also growing. Okay, so now we're going to look at part of the solution process and look in more detail at what the problems are. And I'm breaking this down first for the truckers, because I really do sympathize with them. First of all, truckers are favoring imports over exports. This is not deliberate. This is because it's far easier to actually pick up and deliver an import over an export. The truckers now have to face an appointment system at the terminals, which are not easy to deal with. From the terminals perspective, they were told to organize their terminals better, and their solution to that process was to set up an appointment system. I do think the appointment system is actually good at obtaining empty containers, but I would question whether we should need to make a second appointment to deliver a full container, because it becomes really cumbersome for truckers who have to hire an administrator to obviously arrange all these separate appointments on these loads. And when you're talking about windows being 14 hours in some cases, 1.5 days in some cases, they don't have a lot of time in order to coordinate these arrangements. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying realistically, this is not that easy on truckers. Truckers weren't making money to have to hire now an administrator in order to cover these issues is not easy for them. But this is the new normal that everybody is having to work towards. We've seen a lack of appointments. I'm hoping someone can explain, maybe Ron can explain this more. I'm not sure he can, but there's been definitely a lack of appointments made available from the terminals to load back the export demand. We've seen cases of when the vessel shows up, we've lost half a day between the terminal and carrier having the wrong vessel voyage number in the computer system. This has been obviously communicated to everybody, but then it takes 4 to 5 hours to fix, which is really frustrating when you're dealing with a 24, 48-hour window. So my general feeling is if you consider loading exports and we're waiting a month for the vessel to show up and we're given a small window to deliver the exports back, it's really difficult for the truckers to be interested to do that, because if they can't deliver the export back to the terminal within the gate time, those containers then sit on their wheels until the vessel comes round again, which could be 2 to 4 weeks later. Okay, so again, the trucker has to deal with the liability if they're unable to deliver the container, storing it, keeping it on chassis wheels, not being able to pick up other containers. It's a real headache for a trucker, and I sympathize with them. We've also seen poor equipment offered. Obviously, when there's a shortage of equipment, truckers go and they have to analyze the equipment being offered. It's a difficult process for them. They have a very small amount of time to select a container, whether it's seaworthy or not. They have to inspect it. If they turn one container away, they can go to a second, but then it becomes more and more pressure on the trucker in terms of accepting the equipment. When you have a shortage of equipment imports, a lot of the containers that are import are definitely the more used ones and the ones that are sometimes broken. And we've had problems with containers that have been given to the carrier, not being seaworthy, rejected by shippers. We lose the load, we lose another 2 weeks on the load, and we have to return that container back, which is a wasted journey. And the truckers have a lot of problems negotiating with the carriers, the gate fees, the demurrages that go along with it. So seaworthy equipment is also vital to any US export program, particularly when you're dealing with food and agriculture. Anything for human consumption, we need very, very good equipment, and that is not always provided. Rising in fuel, very, very difficult for the truckers to deal with because their overhead and their costs are going up. But they are at the moment rising full costs on levels that I've never seen before. Fuel has jumped to 64% in certain areas of the USA, so a big jump from 30% to 64%. And I think that trucking costs will continue to be high over the next 12 months and beyond because of the shortage of truckers and now their ability to get more from the truck moves that they're now performing. So in general terms, I just want to say that it's not easy for truckers out there to perform US export loads. If you consider with imports, they go to the terminal, they pick up the import, they drive it out of the terminal and they deliver it. With exports, they have to deal with so many variables of arranging the appointments, dealing with the loads, checking with the factory whether they can load, the sliding gate, the sliding vessel schedule, delivering the container on time, avoiding demurrage and detention issues. There's an awful lot of factors in play for a trucker to consider. And the chart below is more geared to the terminal. It shows how many seconds it takes to unload a container in North America versus Asia and Europe. And you can see it takes nearly 80 seconds to move one turn. And this is where it comes back to the technology and infrastructure argument with the terminals and how we can improve efficiency. This slide is why the carriers don't want to come to Oakland. And therefore, I thought it was important to put it there. I'm not obviously criticizing anybody, or I'm just simply saying this is how it is across the world. And the carriers do want faster turn times on the containers. We're now going to tackle the second component, which is the terminal issues and the problems that the terminal faces. Terminals have had terrible capacity issues and congestion on imports with this surge of cargo coming from China and other countries. And they were solely tasked with handling this huge influx of cargo. We weren't expecting the pandemic. We weren't expecting Asia to shut down for 3 months and then all the cargo show up all at the same time. And they've had a very difficult job to try and deliver the container, keep the terminals cleaned up, and ensure that cargo goes through the terminal in a nice flowing motion. And we know they've had lots of problems, and we know the government have got involved in this aspect, and they put a lot of pressure on the terminals around Christmas to deliver products on time. So the argument here is the terminal needs to keep a clean, organized terminal, but if there's a buildup of empties on the terminal quayside, you know, are they right to reload those units and get them off the terminal to help with congestion issues at the port? Or is that going against the US exporter and not helping the US exporter? I'll go further on in this presentation. I'll go into what I think we should be doing with those empties in order to aid the US export and also help the terminals, because there's an argument for both sides on this one. So it's been a harder process to obviously move containers. This has also been the case for Oakland as well as Los Angeles. It's the case across all terminals. We're having severe congestion in Savannah too. It's not an easy process. And the Oakland port suffers because it hasn't got an on-dock rail. So even if more containers are delivered to the port, if they need to go on the rail, you need truckers to connect the boxes from the terminal to the railhead. And of course, this takes truck power and it takes manpower to get done. So it's not easy. The terminal appointment system, which I've already brought up, so I don't know why I really repeated it for this slide, but obviously it is an important development where I think obviously the terminal are trying to improve the flow of the ports, but it's having an impact for everybody else. The slide below it, the Port of Long Beach slide, a lot of Oakland's equipment supply has traditionally come from Long Beach. Okay, it sometimes comes from Chicago because we have a surplus of containers in the Midwest as well. But Long Beach is a huge port for replenishing empties in Oakland. And this slide is a sorry tale of how many empties are being reloaded by the carriers and how they've acted from 2020 to 2021. You can see the white represents loaded exports, the orange represents empties, and you can see that MSC, CMA and Maersk, OOCL have all been shipping out plenty of empty containers from Long Beach that could have been repositioned in Oakland. So now we get on to the carriers, the third component, the difficulties the carriers have in terms of service. And very interesting, they don't seem to be setting these appointments, and they don't seem to be in control of the windows on which they're receiving cargo. This seems to be more of a terminal concern. I think the carriers should be far more engaged in this process because it makes or break whether US export cargo is loaded to the ship. So in a way, by the appointment systems being established by the terminal, it's an important development, but the carriers seem to have lost control of their own intake of their vessels. Okay, we are seeing a lot of US export cargo not go through the gate on time due to insufficient windows, shortage of windows, sliding schedules. Therefore, the vessel utilization of the carriers is not where the carriers needs it to be. So we're having a big fall down with regards to utilization. In the AgTC meeting yesterday, MSC confirmed that their vessel utilization went from 100% down to around 50 to 55% on each vessel. I was aware that there was a CMA vessel that came into port and left the port of Oakland loading only 100 containers. And this was because the window was too small. They didn't get the amount of exports through the gate on time, and therefore they sailed light. The problem with the vessel sailing light on US export is the carriers start to question whether they need to go there to pick it up. And this is obviously what is happening and is impacting the services from Oakland today. So I do think you will see in my solution column that I think the appointment system and the gate needs to be extended to help benefit US exports and improve the utilization of the vessels. Results from US exporters aren't good enough from the carriers to change current conditions. Therefore, they lose even more motivation for exports, exactly where we do not want this to be. Despite raising export rates, there still seems to be no motivation or focus on US export market. Okay, obviously MSC's decision this week to position in equipment and start to offer global trade services is an exception to this rule. But for most carriers, they're not motivated by US export or providing services. The Alliance have pulled out of services from Oakland to Asia. The MPS service, the service from Zim and Hapag that went into the Mediterranean, has just stopped calling Oakland and will no longer offer a service to the Mediterranean. So services are further diminishing from Oakland, and this is despite raising freight costs on US exports. US exporters, of course, are paying more to Australia, very, very high rates to Australia. Rates to the Mediterranean have doubled. Rates to North Europe are starting to double. Rates to India, Pakistan are doubling. The only market where rates are still seem to be quite competitive are to Asia, but they have definitely gone up. And rates and services to Latin America are very, very difficult, and freight rates are going up also in that trade too. So there's an awful lot of effort being made in terms of paying more for US export services, but the services are diminishing despite this trend. Incentives of Oakland's emissions will focus on import market into LA and Long Beach. Obviously, the reason why Oakland's disappearing is to help benefit imports and keep schedules on the service. Ports being cut in other countries is happening too. So this is not just a US problem, okay? I should also point out that Seattle service connections are worse than Oakland. Vancouver is struggling for services too. So it's not just Oakland where the problems are. We have a whole West Coast of problems, and other countries are suffering similar fates. I've covered the MPS already, so I won't go over that. Carriers are trying to return to old ways of using the rail to get exports from the Northern Californian market out of the country. If you go back to the 90s, a lot of the dry fruit and nut market that went from the US West Coast into the Mediterranean, North Europe, was railed across the country. And the carriers seem to be looking at this again as an option, but the problem is the rail is blocked. There's not enough sufficient truck power to convert boxes that arrive at the railheads through the port systems. Cargo will be delayed, cargo won't be connected, and I honestly don't think that this is a viable option at all at the moment. And we definitely, if we want to move cargo from the US West Coast into the Mediterranean, North Europe, we definitely need to come to Oakland and get it. Ignoring booking demand due to lack of equipment and untenable solutions. This is just my feeling that the carriers don't have a solution to a lot of the problems that they're faced with. They're not aware of what the US exporters are actually going through in terms of service. I don't think this is deliberate. I just don't think they see it from a US exporter's standpoint. But a lot of the problems that we're having in terms of loading exports back, I don't think the carriers really understand it. Growing differences in market strategies is bringing alliances into question.
Quick question.
Yes.
MPS, you have what? Could you tell us what MPS stands for?
Is the Mediterranean Pacific service, and it really was the US West Coast direct service into the Mediterranean. And this vessel was the vessels that Zim and Hapag shared together.
Thank you.
Yeah, the only service to the Mediterranean we have right now is MSC. So see it from Oakland, so serious problem. MSC are not going to be able to take all the cargo into the Mediterranean. They will try to take a lot of it, but there isn't enough capacity, and this is going to be a big problem for the trade. Where was I? Growing differences in market strategies and bringing alliances into question. This is going to be more of an interesting one, I think, for next year. I think the alliances are very unhappy with how certain factors have played out in the last 12 months. I think it's important to realize that not all carriers want to avoid Oakland. Some carriers want to come to Oakland, but their vessel sharing partners are not interested. And this is leading decisions to be made, which doesn't benefit all the carriers. And I think that there will be some changes in alliances next year as a result of this. I think there's real frustration out there today with certain carriers that obviously do feel that the US export market in Oakland is more important than the services that are being offered out there. So it's a bit of hope for the future. And I think that you're going to see alliances change because I think certain partners want different things from the market today. But not just carriers being unhappy, shippers and buyers are unhappy, and everybody's looking at relationships at the moment. Exporters are looking at relationships in terms of some of the alliances that they've had in the past. I think that you're seeing US exporters look at more carriers than they used to in terms of relationships, looking for more service options. So I think there's an awful lot of change going on. There's obviously new truckers are being looked at, new carriers are being looked at. There's a whole lot of new networking and new relationships being formulated due to the problems. And that's quite exciting. It's interesting that more people are open to look at what people can offer in terms of service going forward. And then the bottom slide is the Port of Oakland. Again, as we're focusing on them, it just shows the full and empty configuration. Obviously, the negatives are the amount of empty containers that are leaving the port when we desperately need empty boxes in Oakland for the US export program. So this slide is really considering, is services from Los Angeles and Long Beach the new norm? And is services going to continue to diminish from Oakland? What can we expect? This is of course speculation, but I'm trying to put it together from what I can see on the ground and what I deal with daily. And new tonnage is expected, but not until September 2023. Okay, there is a lot of big ships on order. When those ships will come to the market, obviously this is going to improve the capacity situation that we have globally. I think a lot of the new tonnage will go into the Asia trade lane, so Asia, Europe, Asia, USA. And we may have a situation because with the amount of ships that are being pushed into the Asia, USA trade right now, I think in 12 months you could see too much capacity in that Asia trade lane. And potentially short-term thinking today may not be the best strategy tomorrow for some of the carriers. But of course, it's down to them to organize that and down to them to make the decisions. A key point, importers are being asked to sign annual contracts by the carriers, okay? This is the carriers trying to take high freight rates into the future over the next 12 months by leveraging service and space and trying to get these annual contracts offered. And from what I hear, most of them are going through. So the carriers are going to have some really good revenue on imports for the next 12 months. Obviously, the negative component in that is probably not going to change appetite on US export cargo. Okay, so it does show that we could be in for more than a few months worth of service issues, and we could have a continuation of the position that we're in today. Part of my solution process is going to be to circle back to importers because I think they have a really key role to play in terms of helping US exporters at the moment, and we'll get back to that. Import flows are not weakening. Oakland capacity is still diminishing. And this is just a review of Oakland. As we said, MPS is gone. So Oakland Mediterranean, one carrier, MSC. Thank God they're still here, but they're already aware they're the last carrier left. And that's why they've issued 2 very large GRIs in the space of the first 45 days of the collapse of MPS. MSC has a $1,000 increase on April the 27th and have followed it up with a further $1,000 increase on May 9th. Okay, despite these increases, despite now rates doubling, MSC is the only carrier that will be in the market to the Mediterranean, as I've said. And even with carriers trying to offer rail connections via Norfolk, I don't think it will be a success. To Asia, the Grand Alliance or the Alliance pulled out of services from Oakland to Asia. This means that they do have one string still. I think it's the PS3, which is still operating on a monthly basis from Oakland, but we've practically lost 50% of capacity. And we really only have 5 carriers left that are offering services from Oakland to Asia, India, Pakistan, Dubai, the whole network, everything that goes through Asia. So this is obviously a lack of capacity. I think the carriers left in there are Maersk, MSC, CMA, OOCL, Evergreen. They're the 5. They're still offering pretty much weekly services. CMA may still be in there as well, but CMA did announce last week that they are now ending service from Oakland to India. And that was a huge loss to Oakland as well, because CMA had a very, very nice service into India and obviously helped get cargoes into that area of the world weekly. Oakland to Oceanica, anyone that can get space is worth their weight in gold at the moment. Space is about 8 weeks out. Freight prices are around 20,000 US export, so very, very high. And it's so hard to get space, particularly from Oakland. So little services, just pure lack of capacity. There's not enough space going in there. There's about 4 or 5 direct carriers that can't handle all the cargo, and the transshipment carriers that were helping top up Australia have all left the trade. Latin America, the big blow to Latin America from Oakland was the MPS being closed because Hapag-Lloyd used that service to connect Central and Latin American services. So that's a huge loss to Oakland, losing MPS. We really only have 2, potentially 3 carriers from Oakland. That is Hapag, One, and MSC going forward. Hapag have no equipment in Oakland for the next 3 weeks. They are working on positioning equipment in from Chicago and from Long Beach, but it's going to take them another 3 weeks to get supply in there. One is not overly aggressive in terms of taking cargo from Oakland to Latin and Central America. They're more interested in Los Angeles, but One should not be forgotten. You can get ad hoc space with them if you talk to the right people. And MSC, of course, are fully available, making themselves available for all trades from Oakland, but their freight levels from Oakland into Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, you know, on short string, when you really look at it, it's a short string, it's a short move. Their freight rates have exceeded $10,000 in some cases. So very, very expensive on a short string. From Oakland to the Middle East, increasingly difficult to get space. This is largely due to, of course, the COVID situation that China's suffering at the moment. We've had vessels at a standstill for about 5 weeks now. The feeder connections from intra-Asia that go from China into India, Pakistan, and Dubai are not available. In a way, I think this is actually being handled quite well. They've put a restriction on new bookings being made from the USA because they do not want the congestion in China to get worse. So that's sensible. But of course, it means getting space from these markets at the moment is near impossible. And obviously, if you want to go from Oakland to Jeddah, to Jebel Ali, to India, Pakistan, and these are huge markets, huge weekly demands. MSC is your best bet on a short term, but their freight rates are double the rest of the carriers, and everybody's reluctant to use them for this, but they are offering weekly service, and you can get weekly connections out from MSC. So thank you for them for at least keeping the service going. So Oakland carriers, I touched upon it a little earlier. I've given you the 4 or 5 that are still committed weekly. I should say that Evergreen's not taking any feeder bookings from intra-Asia at the moment because they haven't got space. Costco are out of equipment in Oakland, so they're not viable at the moment as they were. And OOCL really cherry pick cargo. They're interested in certain things. They love refrigerated cargo and they like certain cargoes into Asia, but they're less likely to give you space to Jebel Ali or India. Truckers' resistance to move between Northern and Southern California. There is a push to move Northern Californian cargo by truck down to Los Angeles in order to facilitate the lack of Oakland sailings. There's very, very few truckers prepared to do it. This is quite odd, actually, because I would think that in the months to come, with obviously a reduction of Oakland vessels, these Northern California truckers may have a loss of business to the point where they may have to be more open to do it. But the trucking costs from Northern California to Southern California, the costs are rising. They started off at about $1,500 at the beginning of the year, and they're now up to $3,500 a container. So very expensive. And the operation to take a box from Oakland to Los Angeles is also very, very difficult because chassis equipment and container equipment needs to be returned to the port it's picked up from, which means you have to do a full round trip if you are going to consider this option. Okay, so it's there. My company are doing it. It's not easy, and costs of doing this need to be weighed up against available services from the carriers that are still offering service from Oakland. But I do think you're going to see more of this because I think it is actually a really good viable option. And it does concern me that truckers in Oakland are soon going to struggle for work because if you've not got ships coming to the port and capacity is reduced, where are you going to find your work from? So lack of vessels in Oakland is going to impact the terminal, lack of vessels into Oakland is going to impact the truckers and the US exporters cost-wise. Chassis genset controls, we've seen chassis deplete in Oakland and we've seen gensets deplete in Oakland. There's a lot of work done to try and maintain them at the levels they need to be. And overall, this has been quite well managed, but we do run short. We did run short of gensets a few weeks ago, and we have run short of chassis on a few occasions. But Ron Brown assures me this is fairly well balanced normally, and I'm not going to argue with him because he's bigger than me. The slide below is the spot rate from China to US West Coast. It just gives you an idea of how freight rates have changed since the pandemic hit, where they are currently. But an interesting statistic, and you can see that freight prices are around the 20,000 to 16,000 mark per container. Okay, so this is really the end of my presentation, but the most important slide of all, the solution. What can we do with regards to the hand we've been dealt with? Obviously, I think the key point is what are the carriers motivated from? They're motivated on imports. Okay, so perhaps the importers can have a big role in terms of helping the US exporters. And maybe those importers need to stand up and help the US exporters at this time, because they can also help themselves by doing it. Why is it important? The importers are paying the high freight rates. Maybe they can say, we'll pay those high freight rates, but we need services into Oakland. Okay, we need less congestion in Los Angeles. We need to receive our goods quicker. And we need to reuse these exports, reuse the ports to load exports to get everybody moving again. Okay, so a focus on import rates is important because there's obviously the efficiencies of that is if you could, are US export rates too high or are import rates too high? In my opinion, import rates are too high. Okay, So we need to reduce those import rates and obviously put more value on US exports. And if we can do that, then we will obviously have more success in loading US exports. So I think there needs to be a collective discussion between importers and exporters to work with the terminals, to work with the carriers, to try and find a better balance than we have today. I also think that empty depots would be a good idea. I think that if you have a problem with the terminal being congested, if the carriers allowed US exporters to take empties from the terminal earlier without penalizing them financially with demurrage or detention, it would give them a chance to stage the loads for re-export back to the ship. It would keep the containers off the quay, and it would allow us to get better utilization for the carriers on US exports. At the moment, an insufficient window, insufficient equipment. We need to stage these exports close to the port, or at least allow them to be out longer without being financially penalized. And the only thing the carriers wouldn't gain from this, of course, is detention. But obviously they would have a better vessel utilization and they would get the freight rate back on the export, which is rising. So there's more upside to allowing the US exporters to have the equipment longer without financial penalty. And if this was the case and we allowed US exports to be staged and staggered into the port, we'd be able to load more containers and get more US export away, which, if you consider we're getting less vessels to the port, is vital. Okay, it's vital that we actually use the vessels to the full capacity when they do show up, and that we turn the boxes and reload exports, because we're having to wait so long to get that equipment and that ships into the port. So I see this as a really important development that could easily be performed and would help everyone. Improve vessel utilization, reduce containers on dock. It would allow truckers to do less wasted moves. Okay, why do the truckers need to take an empty back to the terminal when they can give it to an exporter who could reuse it and reload it? It would allow truckers to make more money by doing less mileage, and would be better use of the equipment and better use of using tiebacks. Okay, so I think this would be really good for everyone. Enhanced focus and support on US export market, enhancing profits for carriers in both directions, a more balanced situation that long term would be a better strategy for the carriers and for all. And also, if we've got truckers doing more moves, they can relieve rail congestion and they can better work between the moves that they have to perform on a daily basis. Okay. And finally, this is again another really simple concept that's not done. More carrier transparency on container tracking and utilization. It would be really helpful if we knew where the empties were. Okay, truckers don't tell us where the empties are, carriers don't tell us where the empties are. If we knew that the empties were in the in Northern California, close to loading facilities, we could take those empties quicker, we could reload exports, and we could better use the equipment. It's in this world of technology that we have, on the basis that we have no clue where any equipment is in today's day and age, is not acceptable as far as I'm concerned. And it would be very easy for truckers to send emails offering equipment to others, and it would be easy for the carriers to let us know what truckers have the equipment and where it is at any given point. I've actually run this past the carriers, and MSC will actually provide me with a list of all the truckers that have the equipment, where it's at, and I'm able to return to street turn those units and use it for other people's bookings, and it's really useful. So I would definitely want to encourage this across the whole trade if we could. And then, of course, the last one, tiebacks, leasing equipment between carriers. Obviously, the drawback with that is damages to units and who's responsible, and also getting equipment restituted back to the areas that the cargo owner obviously needs. They are all genuine problems, but if we were to tie back equipment and better use it, we could get more turns done globally, and we could speed up shipping globally. An example would be Yangmin brings a box from China into North Dakota, and Yangmin has no export booking from North Dakota out. So that box sits in North Dakota for weeks and weeks and weeks, not being used. When Hapag-Lloyd has a customer who's ready to move that box, and they could use it if they could sign an interchange agreement with Yangmin, and that box could be around the world by the time Yangmin come rounds to use it. So better use of equipment on the global footprint would be a really good idea at this time. And that's everything I've got to say at the moment.
Paul, thank you very, very much. Peter Friedman from AgTC came on late, and he just sent me a note saying what a great presentation you did and how helpful this is, and especially the last part, talking about some of the issues that we could have a positive result with, such as the empty depots. Before I go into questions, I want to just go back with you on a real fundamental point, which is that the current situation is not hurting the carriers. They are making money. They are doing extremely well. There have been some questions about how much increased utilization, how many new vessels we will see new vessels, but we also see a cutback in older vessels. And at the end of the day, there is a chance that the current situation works out really well for the carriers, and they don't have much of an incentive to change. You are advocating something that is not in the business plan at the moment. Why are you so hopeful that will be successful?
Well, I think the gains that the carriers have got right now are actually temporary. They're good temporary gains, but long term, they're obviously killing a lot of key export relationships. It's going to be hard for these carriers to return to the Port of Oakland and start picking up export containers again in the future. Obviously, everyone's going to be open to use the carriers because we don't have enough global capacity, but you know, it's a short-term gain. You know, keep positioning vessels into Asia just to try to take the freight rates from Asia. Sooner or later, that bubble will burst, and where do you go from there? So the other thing that's really important about this type of thing is if the freight rates are high and capacity is low, it really opens the door for a new incumbent. Okay, and we can't see that incumbent today. We have no idea where that incumbent could come from, but it's wide open for a new player to come into the market and be successful. High freight rates, lack of capacity, a good niche carrier comes in, puts some vessels in there. Everybody's going to support them. They can make it profitable if they select the right trade lanes to go in. I could see a niche carrier doing really, really well, positioning services from Oakland into Central Latin America. I could see a carrier doing well into the Mediterranean, potentially taking taking that service after a Mediterranean drop into North Europe and back, because there's a lack of capacity in that trade as well. But I think a lot of people will focus on USA to Asia, Asia to USA trade. There are new services moving cargo from Asia to the USA, but they're not taking exports back at this time. But this could change. Obviously, they're getting established at the moment. And there's been rumors that certain other big companies that are not currently running container ships will enter the market in the months to come. There is charter vessels being offered. There's charter vessels being taken. The charter market is very, very high at the moment. But, you know, there's always a chance for a new incumbent given the market conditions. And the carriers seem to be not concerned by it at the moment, but you never know.
Thank you for that. I'm going to, Peter Friedman, if you're still here, would you like to come on and give us a little bit of your wisdom here? Maybe he's not here anymore. Peter going once, going twice, don't see him. Okay, Ron Brown, you've heard a lot, you've heard both good and bad here about what's going on. Do you see, do you share the light at the end of the tunnel that Paul is advocating or analyzing?
I do, and I will say the good thing is that there's a lot of attention being drawn to this issue. I've said for many months that this was a situation that was almost inevitable as more and more cargo, import cargo was coming into the West Coast, that we needed to have a better plan, a better strategy as to how that cargo will be allocated along the West Coast. I mean, certainly I'm not willing to concede to our friends on the East Coast, but we need to have a very good West Coast strategy amongst the existing ports. So the problem somewhat was inevitable. And a lot of attention is being drawn to it at the state level, at the federal level. There are a lot of meetings going on. A lot of industry associations are having discussions. There are discussions between importers and exporters in terms of, working out a relationship where, like Paul was saying, more transparency is made available as to where, containers are, where chassis are. So yes, it is painful. There's no question about it. But I think coming out of this, we will have some good long-term solutions, some better planning for infrastructure for all parties. I mean, there's a lot of things that are being discussed that I don't agree with, but at least they are being discussed. I mean, things like short haul rail and truck only lanes and inland yards, inland container yards. So a lot of those things are being discussed, like I said, at the state level, at the federal level. And I think coming out of it, although we will suffer more pain, we will have some long-term solutions that will be beneficial for everyone going forward. That's really what I want to add right now. There is a lot of discussions with the carriers. We're talking with them daily about restoring the services, to the extent that we can. We're putting political pressure on to get them to understand that, the U.S. is an economic system. It's not just a blank check for the carriers to really bring imports in, that they must work with the exporters to make this economic system really work. So, and we need our importers to make that argument to the carriers also.
Very good.
Stas,
Thank you.
could I just ask a question to the truckers that are online? Obviously, we've got some good ones here. Are you suffering business in Oakland, and do you have concerns with being able to operate the way you traditionally have, or do you see potential to go to Los Angeles?
Okay. Evie, hold on a second. I want to see if we've got a trucker here. I saw somebody from PCC Logistics. Bryce.
How you guys doing? Yeah. So especially on the trucking side, and we have been finding really difficult. One of our issues, especially doing a lot of export refrigerated cargo, is that the terminals keep moving to ERDs on us, right? As far as being able to return loaded containers. We have had a request as far as, trucking from Oakland down to Los Angeles, as Paul said, but I mean, again, you're basically wasting a driver for a day and a half, right? Doing that long haul commute. And then unfortunately, he's gonna come back empty. So there's a lot of issues that we're all facing, especially within the trucking community. We're trying to do the best we can with, what we have currently. But, we try to push as much as we can, especially on the trucker side. I mean, trying to, give them as much hope as we can as far as, the turn times and equipment being available for them.
So what I hear you saying is the situation is really a challenge for you guys to go down to Southern California at the moment.
Correct.
And of course, the other problem that is that you then have a problem picking up a chassis and you start to have equipment problems and that stuff is accruing down there and you're not picking it up here, right?
I mean, especially with chassis, using terminal chassis, I mean, a lot of things you could face there as far as the equipment goes. You get a flat tire that, is equipment a part to go down, 300 miles down south, you could face a lot of those issues as well. So trying to have the proper equipment is also key in all this.
Okay, Bryce, thank you very much for this. Evie Wong, you have a question.
Yeah, excellent presentation. So many points in there, Paul. Thank you so much. And Stas, this is just great. I hope it could be used as a tutorial to ocean carriers for the remedies that we need. But the one thing that stuck out, Paul, that I just don't know how we can fix this is you said the lost control of intake. So the appointments for ingating a export, that is supposed to help with what's been booked and what the terminals will see in. Are you saying that the carriers really don't know what is being accepted, have no idea what's happening at the terminals, which we suspect, but the lack of appointments, not getting enough containers in for export, it further reduces the incentive for carriers to come through, all of that. This is really distressing.
Okay, Paul, could you respond?
I don't think they're completely immune to what's going on. I just don't think they're engaged enough in the concerns. Okay. And, it's hard for me to comment on all the facts. I don't have all the facts. I don't know if the terminal is being restricted on how many shifts they can take to load a vessel. And I don't know if the terminal restricts the carrier on how long they can have a berth. And these are key points, because the problem is the window isn't large enough. There's not enough time and not enough appointments to bring the US export in. Okay, so we're continually missing opportunities and we're continually seeing space and time lost to the US export program just because we're seeing a sliding schedule. Truckers have to be 24/7 watching these sliding schedules. They then have to make the appointments when the appointments become available. And many of the times we've got insufficient appointment times and insufficient hours to load and deliver. And another thing that we've seen a big change in, which I didn't mention in the presentation, is we used to have late gate opportunities, which used to be carrier controlled. Now these late gate opportunities seem to be terminal controlled, and it's the terminal that's having direct interface with the US exporters saying yes or no. But in most cases, we've lost the ability to utilize late gates. They're being rejected. And it's probably due to the fact that the shift is ending, that they're not going to let any more containers through, and they want to turn these ships around quicker because there's a large queue of ships to get in.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
I think that Ron should answer that question of how.
Nice of you to do that, Evie. Ron?
I'm just saying we all have to work together, and these, exporters have been complaining.
That's why they pay this guy Brown the big bucks. So
Sure they do.
I mean, if I could name you Obi-Wan Kenobi and say you're our only hope, there has to be a fix to this, and how can we encourage the terminals to have better use of appointment times and then the early return dates to be useful? And the truckers need to know they can't do it all in like half a day. I mean, it's just not working. So Ron.
Yes, Ron.
Well, there's, as you all know, there is never one solution. I mean, it's a combination of many small solutions to try to get to a solution. And, we have been talking with the carriers, we've been talking with the terminals, and, some of the issues, and we were talking about this before the actual webinar, is that, even with some of the cargo that's coming in, and Oakland has seen an increase in imports, if it's not the right kind of cargo, in other words, if there's a large percentage of IPI cargo, then that cargo gets loaded onto the terminal, and then it blocks space for the exporters to bring their cargo in. So the terminal doesn't have enough space to basically receive all the export cargo. If there's a large percentage of empties, and those empties are sitting on the terminal, then again, that blocks space for the exporters to be able to bring in their cargo. So we're having that conversation every day, Evie, with the terminals and with the carriers, and trying to work with them, to get a better balance, or get us back into balance. I guess that's the point that I want to make. Things are just out of whack. Schedules were out of whack. IPI imbalance in Southern California certainly affects us here. IPI imbalance here, of course, because we got so much more IPI cargo that's on the terminal that needs to be trucked across to the rail. But again, that's blocking export cargo. So again, it's a lot of issues. There's no one solution. We are trying to address them all. And we're getting there, but it is painful. There's no question about it. So I don't know if I have an exact answer for you, Evie, but we are working on it. I can certainly tell you that. And we want to make this as easy for our exporters to use our port, because as you guys know, for years, I've been saying to everyone that Oakland is the agricultural port for the Western United States. And essentially, we want to be the agricultural port for the United States. So we've got to make sure that these services flow through smoothly.
Very good. Paul, one last word before we close.
Ron, is it easier to control a terminal when you have weekly services coming in, or is it harder to control it when you've got monthly services coming in?
Oh, dear.
Well, I love those kind of questions because it gives me the opportunity of giving you the perfect answer. Yes, no, and maybe. It depends on the type of cargo. A lot of IPI cargo means that cargo has got to sit on the terminal and then be dragged across to the rail, which blocks, like I said, it blocks space for the export cargo. So it's just a matter of getting things in balance. We can handle more cargo. Oakland was designed to have a throughput of 4 million TEUs. We have never reached that level. Right now, we're at about 2.5 million TEUs of throughput. But the configuration of our infrastructure could handle up to 4 million TEUs. But we've got to get the balance of cargo back that we once had.
Ron, it seems to me that in your kind of trying to answer my question, that there's definitely been times where you are having to choose you're having to choose terminal space over loading the US export because empties are in the way. Okay. And this is probably why we have these windows that we do. It's to stop US exports coming in because they'll be blocked. Is my idea to allow US exporters to take the empties off the terminal and have them longer, not a good solution to this problem?
Okay, one last answer, Mr. Brown.
Yes, as you know, we have established a empty yard. There's a lot of discussions about utilizing that yard for staging, as you made in your presentation. That's something that I suggested that we do early. And it wasn't my idea. And I mean, this is the result of talking to a lot of exporters that they needed staging for space in Oakland because of these short ERDs. So the answer is yes. I mean, we're going to get to that point, but we needed to implement the empty yard to see how it would be utilized, try to get more carriers to make empties available in the empty yard, and then move forward towards using that facility for staging also.
Is there a commercial real estate space outside the terminal that would allow for more empty yards?
Not really.
No.
There's really not space. We had tried to be creative because we do manage the Oakland International Airport to see, okay, is that space close enough for, any of the land that might be available near or at the airport that we also have control over. So we've explored a number of different possibilities, Paul, and the main ones are to get the carriers to work with us to get the balance back in Oakland of imports to exports. That'll make more equipment available and then give us an opportunity to utilize the space that we have more efficiently.
Very good. Guys, on that note, I think we're just at almost at 12:30. I want to thank Paul for a really outstanding presentation. I got lots of comments from people. So Paul, and one of the things that we like about Paul is he does not mince his words. And we get a very straight shot idea of what's going on. Very detailed. I hope the balance that Ron is hoping for is part of a future solution that we see. Paul, thank you very much. You're going to be with the Propeller Club on May 16th, doing a presentation with Lars Jensen about do U.S. exporters need U.S. ships? So we will be sending out that announcement. It's being done through the International Propeller Club. And on the 18th, we have two presentations, one of our Jones Act carriers, which will include Pasha, National Shipping, Ann McIntyre from the Bar Pilots will be speaking, and our own Nick Marone from the Seafarers. We also have a presentation on inland waterways and Great Lakes. But there will be Lars Jensen and Paul Snell discussing the issues on the 16th, and I urge you to be there for that one. We have I believe we have your slides, Paul. If we don't, you sent them yesterday, right? So we have them. Okay. Paul's slides will be available tomorrow. The recording will be available tomorrow. Anybody who's got any questions that we would like us to direct them to Paul, I'm sure that he would be happy to answer them.
Yes, I would.
Thank you. Guys, thank you very much. This is not good news, but we are looking at solutions, and that's really what helps. And Paul, your input here about what we should be doing or could be doing, and Ron, your efforts at the port are very much appreciated. Let's hope that this is light at the end of the tunnel and we are going to make progress. Thank you all very much and see you next time. And for those of you on the maritime front, thank you for your service. And we will see you on the 16th or the 18th. Bye-bye.